know what you're talking about. Yeah, I don't know what's happening. And I'm right next to the fire pit when you get home.
Hey guys, we're gonna,
This myself, I can hear the kind of get some
what we're gonna do is thank you for coming. Oh, good. Invite your kids.
And there he is.
Here.
Good morning.
As Britt is bringing over Tom with Jennifer, I asked Britt to come from Portland to assist me for one powerful reason, which was to do something he's able to do, which is a synthetic statement about what happened this weekend. And he's prepared one, and you'll learn about a fish in the process. So we'll wait for him to come over to do that. But in the meantime, what I want to do is see if we can ask each of you to provide us with a observation of what you thought you got out of these last 2 days.
Could have given us homework last night.
Because I know that if I spoke to each of you privately, you would tell me what was foremost on your head about what you heard and what it represents from your point of view from what you're doing. Gabby, you have the floor.
Well, I think that obviously each one of us came in here being a little bit of with a almost religious attachment to a particular point of view towards drawing. And that's perfectly natural. The thing is that sometimes when you try to bridge the gap between the let's go along and the scientist, this is of course not a precise definition, but just a way of talking about it. There's a lot of mistrust very often. And I think what we do here is to begin to bridge that gap and find that we're not actually on the two sides of something, but we had an opportunity to match and compare and probably get something really productive out of trying to do things together, which was said
Thank you.
a number of times.
I'm going to stop you so we can move along.
Sure.
Mr. Park.
I'm kind of always kind of sensitive about changes and kind of trying to figure out what is the direction, what is the vector of changes. And actually for this kind of symposium, I kind of see that how this kind of like very kind of low labor, kind of humanly touch of drawing mixed with architecture and science and neuroscience. This is the other high end of it. And kind of I'm so curious that how these two factors, when they mix together, what will be the third factor of it? Still, so I see another various factors that we are moving towards, and actually, I feel that kind of evolving another new vector to moving towards. So to be honest, I'm still observing the huge amount of information for the last 2 days. I just haven't had a sense of what it is, but I cannot really clearly say it. But probably that will be our job for next part, because I'm pretty much sure everybody has sense that the new vector is evolving. But I'm pretty much sure, I don't know if you're like me or if you already know what is the new vector, but kind of like that will be our job to state it, express it, and then kind of find it on the kind of, if you are approaching new funding or then probably that's our job to clearly state it.
Thank you. Will.
So I was struck by your comment about wanting to have a smart nerd next to me.
A smart nerd?
Smart nerd. Yeah.
Sidekick nerd.
Right. And then I hoped that scientists want smart artists next to them. And it seemed to me that Jay's presentation was showing us a way forward on that. And I was so struck by the images that are so beautiful and that I think really bridge technology, art, craft, all together. So.
I'm taken again with the thinkers and this whole idea with the brain side of things, because I believe that in the general pedagogy, that if young students entering this profession and even earlier really talked about the creativity of what's happening here and what their potentials are and how the different ways you look at it. Because I sensed coming in that there was more of a, I felt that architects don't do a very good job of really letting, let's say, the whole community, not just the big heads, know what we do and how we do it and why we do it and what it's all about and how it can benefit them. It's like, you know, and I think this sort of conversation, where it's a relatively mature plane here, relatively speaking, in our maturity, needs to happen in the academy at early levels of these opportunities, which we've now taken out of the thing. I mean, they don't even teach art in high school. I mean, the whole thing of how do we get the first tier here. So that's my thoughts.
I just found it to be such a privilege to be among everyone who's really on top of their game, and especially that there's the demographics from so many different places and different ages. And I guess I might have had a few preconceptions that I might hold certain things really dear and feel defensive and maybe get into certain kinds of arguments with people, but I didn't find that to be true at all. I just felt that everyone speaking just had so much particular agency about what they were doing, what they were involved with, and it all just feels very good. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make a bland sort of happy statement, but I didn't feel threatened at all. It was marvelous. Thank you.
Doctor?
So I was quite keen to understand what the special properties of sketching were, such that we are having trouble putting them into anything any big tool. And some of those came out. Perspective was a big one. But some of the more nuanced stuff about how the hand works with paper, no one really talked extensively about the feel of the
Touch.
The touch stuff, or the dynamics or the weight of that, all of which could be dealt with in input devices, if those, it's quite easy to use that as an input device. So and then in private conversations, I was overwhelmed by how inadequate the big tools seemed to be. People had so many complaints, and they seemed so simple to fix, some of them. So there's just a big gap, is what I saw.
That's very interesting. Patty?
Yeah, I guess I think it's a question of, it's a pedagogy that could be built that doesn't exist yet, maybe. And in terms of how to integrate what we get out of drawing and how we could use computers. And so that to me speaks to a need to articulate the end goal, because it seems like with sketching, there's a facility there and you can put it towards whatever you're trying to do. But with the computer, you have to be able to tell it or kind of direct it toward what you want it to do. And so with the hand, you don't have to articulate that as much. You can kind of find your way. But I feel like maybe we need to articulate what we want the computer to do, and then we could really try to embrace it. I mean, it's a pedagogical question, I think, like how we teach it and how we structure that learning, something like that.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah. Obviously, I like drawing in the old traditional way with the texture of the paper and the emphasis we can get from the particular thing we're drawing from, whether it's the charcoal or the pencil. And I sense this great gap between that feeling and the feeling of working on the pad. And yet I see that if one were to put their mind to it, there would be a way to develop the texture of the pad that perhaps would begin meeting my requirements for that. But I still feel like not an unfriendly chasm, but there's a chasm between those two. I guess I felt like you gave me some hints where we may be going in that direction and may be able to do that.
David?
Well, I have to say, when I Kelly asked me to come here, I'm thinking, well, I guess I'll finally learn what it is that's going on in my head. And I'm not sure that question's been answered. So many of you have talked at a level that is beyond my understanding, and that is not at all your fault. That is the language which I think most of you share and which I am somewhat behind in. But I do think I have come away with understanding a little bit about the connectivity process in the brain and what comes through my fingers and my hand. I think that at one point, it may have been just at the end of yesterday, I felt like, I think we have, in an attempt to understand what life is, we have dissected the body and we have killed it, and we just have a kind of mass of bones and flesh on the floor. But I think there's a really great opportunity that we're all hopeful for, that these will come together. I think there is a gap now. And I think that those of you who are educators know that better than anybody else, between what some of us used to do all the time and some of us still do, and how that can be conveyed to students today. So good luck, and I look forward to the results.
Thank you. Frank?
Well, I want to thank you again as well, everybody, and just all these wonderful conversations. It's really been a wonderful meeting in every possible way, and it's going to take me a while to digest this. So I have just a few bullets for you. Bullet number one is that it's now becoming okay for scientists to be seen in public with artists. I organized and ran 3 conferences, 3 international conferences on music and the brain in the 1980s and early 1991. And it's just been within the last 4 or 5 years that you begin to see serious meetings with people who have names and who have institutional affiliations, who are willing to show up and be interviewed and so forth. It's not dangerous for their career. That's one thing. Second thing is that one of the things we learned in looking at music was that the digital divide, which is kind of a code word or a handy word for pointing out that there are differences between people's understanding of this technology. But also there's an age-related one, and what the musicians learned was the kids arrived with Casios that they bought in the drugstore and could do more with those when they arrived than their professor was ever going to do. So the bullet point number 2 is I think this kind of a setting is a natural one for drawing on what kids bring from their previous experience and their ability to really grasp what you're trying to do and to move it into a technology oriented enterprise. Number 3, I just want to emphasize another thing, which is I sort of intimated, but I don't think I said clearly, is that I come from a background in clinical medicine, and I've been interested in issues of health, the health of performing artists, and the use of art as an adjunct to mainstream medical treatment. Music therapy is an example of one of those that has also come a very long way. Didn't talk about that at all. So that's enough for my time. I have more bullets, and I'll write to you about that. But those are 3 things that really stand out with me at the moment.
Thank you, Frank. Thomas?
I don't think it can be said often enough that Jennifer and you and Marlene and Marla and Mel have put together something so extraordinary that it seems like we've barely scratched the surface, but it's a surface that is incised with an extraordinary depth. On the first day of my classes, I blindfold my students. I don't think this is necessarily an original idea, but it came to me. And they work blindfolded for hours and hours working on their touch. And that touch is fused with information from not only how the marks can essentially levitate above the surface of the sheet. And the hardest thing to do for students who are young is that they have all of this testosterone and strength, and they tend to press really hard. And the more they think about a subject, the more their hand and their shoulder and their neck and their brain becomes pushing into the surface. And so much of what we talk about in music is that extraordinary touch that George Millett had. He had an enormous range of pianism where he could get a huge sound. He had enormous fingers like Rachmaninoff, and he also had the most delicate touch. And that wide range, as wide as possible, where the marks become invisible and are so invisible that they begin to speak to a range of emotions that create a spectrum. The second thing I wanted to comment on is this notion of making and unmaking. The beauty of what we do is unknowable. And I speak for myself. So much of what I do is completely unknowable, and every day is una aventura. And I can't wait to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and start to work, whether I'm on site or whether I'm in my studio. I love the fact that Gabi mentioned yesterday the notion of making models as an integral process, part of the process. But I would argue too that all people who are interested in working can take lessons from the scientists in 2 ways. One is the obsession, the development of an idea that often takes many, many years to develop, and perhaps arrive at speculations which lead to more and more and more speculations. The other is the notion of unmaking, that as we make, I would argue that more importantly, we unmake. We decry with our inner voice, which is sometimes very tiny and very hard to listen to. We decry that the tiniest, most pure thing that's within inside all of us can become a vessel for everything in the world, can come toward us. It's not a matter of going out to the world and finding all kinds of interesting ideas. It's as much that as it is that the ideas are coming to us, and that we learn to listen. And as a result of that process of listening, we unmake our work constantly. We're constantly unmaking, so that the spool of research is endless. I believe in going the long way around, and that the process of drawing and the process of thinking should be something that should be prolonged as long as possible, and this is something that I believe scientists understand, that the laboratory itself is made as pure as possible for the investigation of the detritus, the filth, all the unknowns, all of the passages, all of the portals, all of the soffiti, the ceilings, that our ability to understand these diverse elements come to us to this little tiny element. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. What's that? Yes, it's how far?
Okay, I'm not hearing today, so, right. So, you want to know about our personal.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm very interested in how knowledge, and I mean this very broadly, is expressed, especially non-verbally, and how the modes of expression affect our thinking and the products of the modes of expressing affect our thinking. So the things that we put on a page, the arrangements that we make in the world, including the larger arrangements in a city, and how they affect our thinking, and how they reflect our thought and how they affect our thought. And again, especially in this spatial, visual way, motor way. I'm also interested in the connections of words and in the kinds of abstractions that go across fields of knowledge. Art is one, so concepts like surface, perspective, corner, composition, space, those sorts of concepts that we use in thinking about almost anything, because I think they derive from the way that we think about space and the way that the body interacts with space and does stuff in space. So all of that, to me, it's a huge agenda. All of that is fascinating to me, and I learned a lot from everybody here about that. I mean, just, again, it's a perspective. Hearing other perspectives is really informative and interesting.
Thank you.
Okay.
How are you going to help?
Describe.
Okay. Well, I mean, some of the things that came to me while listening to all the talks, I was thinking that the definitions were varied for, drawing and sketching and this and that. And I realized for this connection of drawing the brain, it's helpful to identify some of those things and maybe even hone in a little bit more. So one thing I thought about, though, if we were not to hone in, just kind of think about the different kinds of drawings and what they could teach us about ourselves, what's happening in the brain and what the value of it is. Like, there's a kind of drawing that's precise and about kind of rendering or explaining a three-dimensional environment in a two-dimensional page or something, and that kind of translation or transposition is interesting. Something's happening there. What's happening? What part of the brain's active? Then there's another kind of drawing that is exploratory and expressive and comes from imagination and memory and something else. I'm curious about that too, because I feel like it may not be exactly the same process. There's another one that is similar to that first one, but instead of being very precise and linear and related to points or perspective or something, is rhythmic and has more to do with composition and more to do with actually stuff that Tom was talking about, like space, an explanation, an exploration of space in a way that is holistic and not based on points and analysis. And then there's this other one, which is this kind of rudimentary, nascent, like the sketch, like the quick idea in real time, playing out in real time. I think those are really, they're all sort of different and maybe could teach us different ways about how we use the brain. And then there's also maybe another one, which would be more of a drawn-out process that's like an investment, which happens in many different ways. It could be staying with an artwork for a very long time, and that is a different kind of thing. I think it actually takes us a little bit outside of this, because I feel like that's more about artwork in general, or writing a novel or something. It becomes closer to that to me than this idea of maybe the immediacy of what we're talking about, like what's happening inside our heads, and do we value this as a means of thinking or working?
Yes, you may. Wow.
All right. So I just wanted to sort of talk about how we started this thing.
Right.
It was kind of under the idea that drawing and sketching, at least in the classroom and in the educational system, was under siege. And so, and that came about through listening to this conference at Yale, which was Is Drawing Dead? And the conclusion was basically, but not totally, that drawing was dead. And in that time frame, you know, we would be going completely to the computers. So after this conference, there were a couple things that I thought were important. I am trained, or I had an undergraduate degree in biology, so I understand the way experiments are kind of sort of limited by, you know, the unknowns or whatever. And so I think as a group, we kind of have to start to think about definitions, and Caleb and I were talking about that before, about what is a sketch versus what is a drawing, what sorts of attributes does a sketch have, because that's kind of the learning period in my mind. So it's the part where you are experimental, you are able to take risks, and many of the things end up going in the trash. In fact, most of them do. So there's no real commitment. But whereas the drawing itself seems to be the thing that's complete. And I think as a group, if we're going to think about this as a codifiable element, you have to, we're kind of, in my mind, talking more about the sketch and the process. And I think that another thing that was interesting was, I had a prejudice when I came in, but because of the way the conference went, at the end, when we were talking to Jong and Carl, I was kind of transformed into thinking that this is kind of a continuum, and that the things that David said are true. We should maybe be thinking about these, or we have to be thinking about these things as sort of a continuum. But the idea that the sketch itself does something different, I do believe the sketch itself does something different in your brain and as a process. And I think it's a kind of a tragedy that when we're in the educational world, kids don't bring pencils and paper to class anymore. They don't use that as a training ability, and so they're not able to think I don't think in 3 dimensions as well as they might, or as that if you were. So I think as a group we have to figure out how we can talk to each other as almost as either guinea pigs and scientists, or somehow defining an experiment that will work, that will in some ways support the attributes of sketching.
Yeah, you're optimistic. So I was continually struck by how, there were these apparently different approaches, how many different approaches, yet still approaches that shared some core set of priorities and values and like what we were trying to achieve and explore and understand and create. It was a real treat to listen to everyone. It's such a distinguished group, and I could not help but hear hypotheses everywhere that I hopefully other colleagues will want to test in the coming years about cognitive architecture, if you will, and also the kinds of things that we ought to try to explain, to understand what would it really count for something to work, for an explanation to really work, to really capture what matters. And that was really helpful for expanding my own understanding of what we ought to strive to explain, even though it's going to be a tall order. And I think I'll be able to do my job better moving forward if this conversation isn't the first and last, if it can continue in some way. So.
Thank you.
So there are a few, but I don't want to repeat what's already been said, so I will describe my confusion in the beginning and curiosity about this difference between drawing and sketching. And it was really interesting hearing the responses to that question and how things kind of changed. And so that was fun. I think the other, and I'm only going to say one other thing, and I think it's thinking about how and I sort of say architects and artists you're all artists. At least from my perspective, it's like you're all artists. And the way you see the world is different than the way I see the world. And that just became, it really became apparent to me when we were walking over to the cocktail party and Kelly was sort of showing us things, and I was like, you cross this plane and this, it's like, okay, you say so. And thinking about our education system, and I think maybe it was Kelly who mentioned this idea that everyone should take drawing because it allows you to see the world and different perspectives. And thinking about how to market drawing to the masses as part of the educational system, I think there's some real reasons to do that, not just for the purpose of art, but for the purpose of developing your cognitive system. And so, I mean, I see great potential in doing that and sort of opening up the liberal arts again, just in this way of because I think something's lost when our students don't take these liberal arts classes and they don't see the world as a whole world. And so that's one of the things that I kind of pulled from this whole.
Thank you. Karen?
Well, first I want to say how much I think is so important for all of us to learn from each other. And for me, it was enlightening speaking to some of you and hearing some of the talks and learning a lot from this different perspective, I would say. But I guess my interest is in education and in learning. And so what I really took out of this, and I think this is kind of an idea that I've been thinking about for a long time, but you know, as scientists, we group people together a lot, and we pump them in these categories. And what I really, I think the main thing that right now I'm thinking about that I've sort of taken from this is that we're all interested in the creative process. And as scientists, we create things, and as artists, we create things. And to me, when children are learning or adults are learning, I think sometimes we lose that individuals bring their whole world, their whole experience to everything that they learn. So when they're creating by hand and they're sketching, they're bringing that experience with them. There's the flexibility for them to express their own background. And in that way, and it's the same with writing to me, is that they can reinterpret what they're hearing and make it their own. And in that way, I think children and adults as well can learn much better when they restate things in their own words or in their own diagrams and sketches, and et cetera. So for me, that was a really important thing that's come out of this. And I think that there's lots and lots of experiments that can be done that I've been thinking about. But we don't we don't necessarily need experiments, but I think that bringing this creative process back into learning is something that is crucial, and I think sketching is one way to do that. So I think it's been great.
Carl?
So for me, it's very exciting to see technologies and research that I might have previously assumed or considered to be about generating understanding or generating knowledge or doing analysis, that I can start to now imagine them as being operative in an art and design context. So that to me is the benefit of a conference or a symposium like this, where there's a reveal about the sort of under the hood stuff about some of this technology that makes me want to feel like I can steal it and use it or misuse it. Relatedly, us artists always want to steal stuff. And the stealing is the right word because we want to impolitely make it ours. But on that note, I also think it's maybe valuable to mention that, in my opinion, as an artist, architect, my contribution to collaborative work is on the order of making projects out of things, not in participating in experiments. That's just my weakness as an artist, is an inability to be constrained by experiments, but can be productive in terms of forming projects out of technology. Thirdly, I'm interested in how taking what happens here and thinking about the form of a publication and the idea that there might be some cross-sectional issues Barbara mentioned some, but I think like layering, composition, the body, and the corner might be, there might be something valuable to taking sort of paired or groups of 3 that were different than the groups that we presented in, which kind of made a lot of sense, but to form groups that don't make sense, and then to sort of force these skewer issues would be interesting to me. And then fourth, I just want to put on the table a precedent. Patty mentioned pedagogy, but which I agree about, but I also, it's just because kinds of things I'm working on at RISD is the idea of curricular innovation. Cal Arts developed a digital arts minor with NSF funding, which is an interesting precedent, the ability to develop new kinds of curricular modes. I think is an interesting way to bring learning and to bring the arts and the sciences together.
I will interject, which is now I reveal my secret purpose for having people here. We're about to start. We'll get there. I haven't forgotten. I just had to interject because it was the appropriate time. Say that what you all been doing is helping me because we're preparing. We have the opportunity to create a program from scratch. And this is going to be at the heart of the issue, particularly for design. So thank you. Dr. Forbes.
So it's been wonderful. In fact, one of the things I'm coming away with is a resolve to do at least one sketch a day. Absolutely. I mean, time and task, right, really matters. We actually, I don't know if you know this, but we actually we're in the process of dodging a bullet. So children grow up today with keyboards and touch screens, and pens were vanishing. In fact, around the turn of the century, they were all but dead, right? I mean, Microsoft was down to 3 programmers worldwide working on ink. That's totally changed. That's totally changed. So for instance, the new version of Windows 10 coming out in July has ink as an OS level feature. Now it's not going to be artistic ink, okay, but it's going to be ink. And it's getting people back into thinking about using their hands to mark things up and annotate and draw and create. And so Wacom is actually aggressively, their main people they support are artists, and they are aggressively pushing cross-platforming standards, universal pens, and all sorts of things to try to really push this out. So you've got a bunch of companies that are now believers. Even Apple's on board again, right? Jobs will keep dead long enough, right? The taint of the new to go away. But so, now finally, the people who really prefer screens, it's going to be not quite as easy as this, but pretty close. That's going to make a big difference. The second thing, in terms of, so some friends and I actually built some solid bridges between the AI research community and game designers. Okay, through a series of symposia, one a year, AAA Spring Symposium, and spun off to a conference. Okay, and that was very successful. I mean, it's fun. Everybody enjoys it from different perspectives. The one problem, and this remains a problem, is money. Game industry will not fund research. One guy actually spent some time doing it, the technology that they want to use, and, quote, they laughed in my face. Really? NSF program managers will say, don't use the G word, okay, right? Use the G word, you're screwed. You can talk about games in the context of education or therapy, but not just for entertainment or aesthetics or enjoyment. Okay. It's a very weird disconnect. I mean, I'm heartened that you actually got funding from NSF for something about art. Because
Cal Arts did, yeah, not me.
Okay. I mean, so I know a program manager started a program called Creative Intelligence to look at computer science and the arts and really push on that. And the first time she tried to fund an artist under it, it went all the way up to the head of NSF Legal. Because at first it didn't want to fund it. And she said, sure. Yeah, she went. But it really is still uphill. Even though when you look at NSF's charter, it's important. Right? We're supposed to actually support the economy. Well, entertainment and art is part of the economy. engineers use this argument all the time and successfully get funding out of MSF. You know, they haven't quite made that leap yet. They're getting there slowly, but it's really slow.
Thank you. Jennifer? You started? Yeah.
Well, in my brief discussion on Thursday night, I said that design is made for all of us, it's all around us. And I have to admit that I've located design in the ghetto of art and architecture for a little bit too long over the weekend. It's expanded to now include the sciences. And I just wanted to thank you for that exposure, particularly for also helping break down my fear barrier of the dialectic or just the war that I've had in my mind of technology versus the hand. And I'm very relieved to think that one day I'll be able to have a messy desk that's a computer top.
Brett, I'm going to skip over you.
Yes, please.
Wrap up and
What, are you going to skip over Brett?
No.
Participants
We're
first.
saving it for last.
Yeah, moderate last.
Well, when I heard about this conference and that Frank Wilson was going to speak, you had me. I read your book in 1998. At the time, I was working with a group of potters in North Carolina at the Penland School of Crafts, and they're the ones who told me about your book. Because potters and blacksmiths and weavers and bookmakers, they all use their hands. And in the world of art, the crafts are generally given second or third place. They're not often considered as important as fine art. And of course they resent that, and there's no basis for that. But anyway, it was great to hear you speak. And I still wonder if we dealt enough with the question that you raised in your brief about yourself, the notion of using the hand as a way to understand other things, like at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So when I was just thinking, when I was a youngster starting out in the 1960s, I was a student in London, and there was a distinguished critic and writer named C.P. Snow, and he had just written a book called The Two Cultures, which everyone was reading and talking about, and it was about the divide between science and art, between technology and other creative forms of endeavor. And I wonder if we are not seeing that same divide and an attempt to bridge it like we did today. If you think of the way that many artists are celebrated today, like Jeff Koons, for example. Jeff Koons doesn't use his hands. It's conceptual art, and it's done by others. So I'm just wandering here, but it seems that this is a conference that's raised some very important issues, and I'm glad to be part of it.
Thank you, Frank. Britt?
We talked this morning before coming, and we talked about, I talked about going to each of you here and touching on you and to say what you meant, and I'm going to avoid embarrassing you in saying that, but I will say that the pain of this for me is leaving. I hope I do not leave you all, because I'll bring you with me. The secret of resolving the forces behind a duality in design is to smash them together, to make them a holy trinity, to make a soul and an individual out of the two halves. If, when you draw, we talked about what is a definition. And for us, as Mr. Gwynn said, we don't really define between a drawing and a sketch. I see them in, if we are the designers in the middle of the storm and the scientists are those who see the storm, we can't see the storm. We don't know we're a storm. One of the little battles in the storm is diagrams and pictorial drawings battling. And when they come together and clash and come apart, one becomes the other. And they clash again and one becomes the other. And the battle makes the twirls inside the storm. And for me, this comes from my two teachers who taught me to draw, Mr. Glenn and Mr. Harmon. Mr. Harmon taught me stories with drawings. That's the way he talked to me and taught me. The same way he talks in native places now, he spoke to me at the desk. When we listen to the world and we do those things, we're making these storms going on out. The whole 2 days was also a storm of all of these going back and forth together. I thought it was remarkable. If I feel now, as I said last night, I've got a whole new host of consultants, and I can call on you. You validate me by talking about what I do. Barbara, for example, I will pick on her specifically. When she speaks, it is like an opera singer. Her tone of voice, she sings. And while she listens to us, she dances in the room. She's an artist in her viewpoint. It's that constant dancing that goes on, and that's what I mean about talking about each of you and seeing. The one line that kept coming to mind is "Ceci tu ceci," the opening lines of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, where the beast saves the beauty and jumps from the tower of the house of God. And of course, "Ceci tu ceci" is French for "this kills that." And the discussion is, the book kills the church. And if you want to read that, read Umberto Eco's essay on that phrase. He has a beautiful essay on that phrase. And of course, the book did not kill God. Yesterday, it crystallized for me when Carl and Gabby and Dr. Parr sparked. And I thought that was wonderful because I immediately thought of radio waves and the scientific analysis of radio waves going to visual waves, and they're all vibrations on a continuum. And I went, wow. And I thought of, this is how crazy it becomes for me with the stories. I thought of fish food. Fish, food for they always call it brain food, right? So when I was raised, my mother would say, eat your fish, it's brain food. And if you remember, the first way we caught a fish is to probably, or the one that washed up on the shore, we ate the rotting one. But then we figured out how to stand over the side of the stream and dash our hand in. But then we realized that the fish wasn't where we saw it. And you had to push your hand to the place where the fish really was, not where you saw it. But you had to look at it and then dash blindly to grab the fish with your hand, Dr. Wilson's prehensile piece. And now you had the brain food. If you remember, just a few weeks ago, a man died who was a calligrapher. He was a priest and a member of a silent order who taught at Reed College. And one of his most famous pupils is actually a lighting designer I'm working with now. But actually one of his other most famous pupils, which you all know, was Steve Jobs. And out of that teaching came Jobs' aesthetic and life mission from seeing that. At Reed College, they also have a tradition that every undergraduate does a thesis to end their school. About 15 years ago, one of the students won a National Science Award for his thesis. He was a mathematician's master, and his thesis was to describe the path of a point through space that is at the end of a flexible line that reaches a rigid line that attaches at a hinge and moves from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, or 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock, and back to 2 o'clock, and snaps and goes. And what is the motion of the point in space? And he described that path. That path is a fly at the end of a fly rod and line. That fly catches a fish. That fish is brain food. When Dr. Park said yesterday that coding is craft, he was talking about fish food. That's fish food. That if the hand and drawing was an extension of the brain, if you were born and the brain was looking for a hand, the hand began to look for a pencil. We didn't start drawing with paper and pencils. We drew in the dirt. One of my clients and collaborators in Oregon, Patrick Courtney Gold, is a Wasco Indian. She rebirthed the Wasco Indian weaving tradition. I asked her one day, we were working on a pavilion for Celilo Falls, where they used to fish, on the Columbia River. And she was talking about, I thought, a person and the role of the person in her family and her family's life and her life. And then I realized she was talking about the Columbia River as an entity. And I asked her, where did your family fish? Oh, right here. And I said, how did you know? Oh, she goes, oh, it was marked with an owl. My family's symbol was the owl. The petroglyphs, they're signs. It means this family fishes here where the owl is. You can't fish here. We fish here. That sign now has been broken off. Before it was covered by the river, and it's in Horse Thief Falls Park on the Washington side. You can see all of that. That's all of a continuum. That her family has been there for thousands of years doing that, fishing on that river. And they were doing the same things we're doing now. And with that, Frank taught me the stories, the value of the stories. And Mr. Gwynn taught me to draw. And so I'll end with the phrase that I still use. Shut up. And very simply it is.
How come you don't call me Mr. Harmon?
Mr. Harmon. Sorry, Bill. It goes back and forth. It's the duality. Their seniority, their friendship, their commonality. But as Mr. Gwynn said, from Mr. Harmon, teaching me, be no more particular than necessary. Be open to the possibilities. Thank you.
I like that.
Thank you. So, Marlene, could you talk about an idea you have?
Well, hopefully we'll all get together to create a book or some sort of a product. And I happened to find this book, which though it could be sort of a kind of a precedent for, or not, whatever, prototype for what we might produce. And it's basically a book that is for the architects and artists. Has a really great, like, sort of format with lots and lots of pictures. But the interesting thing about it is that it was the people who were involved with it. I mean, there are 16 people. Okay, and so and the page limit here is 264 pages. And I think for a book prototype or precedent or whatever you want to call it, 340 pages is the max, okay? And so we could actually include everybody in this volume in a nice way, talking about what happened here, what you felt happened here. And the other thing is that when we think about this, we have to kind of think about it as a book that would be approachable by the general public. So it would be a different kind of a writing for the scientists and the artists together. So I would encourage you to look at this sort of book because it has a nice format. It also it's sort of a model for what we've actually done here. And the other thing is that there are sort of funding opportunities, one of which is going to happen at IU soon. And it was spawned by this very conference, and so Ed Commental basically put this forward to the provost and to everyone else as this idyllic integration of art and science. And so
It's gathering a funding base through the university to substantiate this very kind of thing.
And so this conference idea kind of spawned this greater funding thing that, but the interesting thing is there is going to be a sort of public meeting on Friday, which I think everybody who's at IU can kind of attend, and we might think of this as sort of a group that might go forward as, I don't, you know, sort of a mini grand challenge kind of a thing, to go for funding through the university, because it is an initiative that is talking about integrating science and sort of the liberal arts, and I don't know, you know, what the format of this will be and how much of this we might include or be able to, but we might think about that.
Our most immediate step will be to take everything that was recorded, each of the sessions. We'll do some editing and get it placed onto a website, Drawing in the Brain. With, we add a blog and a place for all of you and others to put articles or things you write or things you've discovered in a repository that we could have, like an inventory we can have access to. So that's my next step to do that. And we'll stay in touch by way of our usual email with our progress on this.
But your idea of having a blog would be good, because I think everybody is going to want to converse with, or at least that's my impression, is converse with each other, and through a blog you can basically read what everybody is thinking. Yep.
So two questions. One is if each of us contributed, how many words approximately?
Yeah.
And the problem is the imagery too. And that brings to the second question, and that's permissions.
Right.
Many of you create your own imagery, and then it's not a problem, but for those of us who steal, it can kind of be a problem.
You remember the adage, good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Right. No, I would.
Well, I think that's.
Stravinsky.
Yeah, that's
Stravinsky.
something that we can,
Okay.
well, I know that.
I'm sure you know.
We'll address that. So I'll just pass this around and you all can look at that and see that it's kind of an interesting format.
But the word count, because it is a short book and we're a lot of people.
I asked Marlene yesterday to begin with, whenever you can disseminate everybody's emails.
Email, yes.
Yes, we will.
Send everybody's email, phone number, and address.
I know you'll be too busy.
Torment each other at will. But hopefully you'll torment each other in this public forum, because I think that would be more.
You can do both.
Yeah, you can do both.
So thank you, guys.
It was a great.
Thank you for coming. It's a huge thing for me, and what's important is that we have this place has an opportunity at IU to build something from scratch, and I wanted to use what you guys were going to help me understand to help build what's going to happen next. As I said, it's unformed.
Let us give you a hand.
Absolutely thrilled that you think cognitive science, brain sciences, is relevant to art making and architecture making. So I'm thrilled by that. And in contrast to C.P. Snow, I really do think we have a lot to say to each other. So I'm thrilled that you're open to that.
Thank you.
I wanted to say that this was so good that I hope to live long enough to be able to work with everyone.
I know that there's been some concern about getting back to the airport in a timely fashion. Now, are we all straight on this? Is there anyone with a concern that they don't know how they're going to get home?
Well, I understand there's an 11 o'clock shuttle and a 2 o'clock shuttle.
So now normally it's from Columbus, it's a 50-minute ride to the airport. 64 is under construction, and so it necks down from bit to bit, so you can see it on your Google map where it slows up. But this is not Brooklyn. You know, they don't really have traffic here. They call it that. It's not. The airport is the slickest airport I've ever been through. I've dumped Jennifer off with 15 minutes to get on an airplane. She gets through.
I slide.
It's right into the seat.
Coffee in hand.
So, no, it's a really fast airport, and it's not like anyone I've ever been through. It gets usually it's never been held up, not once. Right, so they seem to do a good job, because there's not a whole lot of folks going through it. Right, it's kind of a quiet airport, and it's well organized, so you shouldn't have trouble with that. So, may I ask who's going to get on the later shuttle? 2, 3, okay, 4, and then the rest of you will be jumping, is there room?
How many are on the first shuttle?
I think y'all fit, all right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
All right, well, you have to pretty much head over now.
Yes, you do. Carl, would you please identify?
We've been a couple times.
Take a look.
Recently published a book, Architecture and Products. I have my house. Because it's the only
I'm sorry, you pulled me over. You was not expecting that. Thank you so much.
I am too.
Well, I'm very